Surviving Mormonism with Heather Gay is a new show that covers some of the most harrowing aspects of the Mormon Church. From conversion therapy to abuse cover-ups, this show covers so many things that, even though I was a member for over 20 years, I had no idea was going on behind the scenes. Today, Heather is joining us for an exclusive interview, and she's going to share what it was like to make the show and some of the things she learned. We're also going to talk about some of the drama that happened on social media when the show was just initially announced and no one had even seen it yet. So Heather, thank you so much for joining us, and if you could just introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. I'm Heather Gay. I'm from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. I'm also the author of the book Bad Mormon and the follow-up companion book, A Good Time Girl. And I'm most recently the host and executive producer of the docuseries Surviving Mormonism that is airing right now on Peacock.
And today we're going to dive into each episode of the show. We're going to talk through some of the most poignant issues raised by the show. Like I said, the show covered conversion therapy. It went into how often church leaders turned a blind eye to abuse. There's so many really awful things that I think were important to be covered in this show. But despite the very, very real issues that you address in the show, the initial response to it online was mocking, to say the least. And I'm going to read a headline from the Deseret News. This is a news organization owned by the church. And in response to the announcement of the show, the headline was, "Surviving Mormonism, and it's just a church member showing up with some cookies." Heather, when the show was first announced, what was your initial thoughts based off of this mocking reaction from online?
I thought how typical. We're talking about very, very serious issues, crimes against children, and we are now going to trivialize and silence these brave survivors and instead make it about the fun, cute, Instagrammable moments of Mormonism instead of like the dark, real experiences of people that called themselves members of this church for the majority of their lives.
Yeah, I thought it was crazy. If you read that Deseret News article, they even say within the first few paragraphs, they know that the show is about abuse, and they are still choosing to run this headline, which is really trivializing the entire thing. And what I thought was so interesting was that in episode 1, one of the first comments you make is how the church really sidelines critics. And I was wondering, based off of this show, but also your book, Bad Mormon, what your experience has been criticizing the church and being sidelined.
The first thing we do is diminish it, and just minimize it, trivialize it, ignore it, and turn it into a joke. And that way it becomes, it loses its potency, basically. But the fact that Mormonism thinks that it can just put a sing-songy spin on everything, this PR, flip it around, and like you say the glass is half empty, I say it's half full, like Mormonism, but I'm just, fielding requests for free babysitting from the young women. And for you to mock survivors' pain and survivors' experiences, especially when these were people who, if they called themselves Mormons, you would circle the wagons around them, you would, embrace them, you would do everything you could to keep them within the fold. But the second that they have a negative or bad experience about the church, you're going to disbelieve them, disprove them, and even worse, pretend it never happened.
Yeah, I mean, on the comments of that article, and I'll also say that it wasn't just that article. There were Reddit threads mocking the show. There were social media posts, Instagram, YouTube videos. This is a comment from the Deseret News article. It says, "I was unable to survive Mormonism. Their leaders teach I am less than. My family is unqualified for exaltation because my Heavenly Father created me gay." And the response to that is, "So they tried to help you, but you insist upon wallowing in your depravity." And I think that this really does reveal something that was in the show, was describing Mormonism as a plushy toy with a knife in it. And I think it really reveals that this shiny, happy face of Mormonism often has this underlying level of really severe levels of harm and a total inability to acknowledge the real pain and harm caused by these doctrines.
Yeah, there is a level of violence, both in the doctrine, in the covenants, in our history, and in the plushy toy with the knife inside. Like for someone to share experience and for you to say you're wallowing in your depravity, that is not the face of a Christ-like church.
Yeah, as you left the church, and we're about to jump into episode 1, but I'm curious, as you left the church, obviously you were on Real Housewives, you are on Real Housewives, you've had a fairly public faith journey. As you left the church and you expressed pain and a sense of feeling lonely and harm, what was your experience with how people around you reacted?
Basically, that's what sin feels like. No wonder you feel that, because that's what sin feels like. So repent, return, and the clouds will part, and your world will be kind of like them's the breaks, kids. You knew the rules when you signed up for it. It's just a hard thing to describe to people. And I know that you understand it intimately. Like, to have people that say they love you and that they would do anything for you, but accept you as you are. It's like, and there's no way to reconcile those two worlds.
Yeah, when I left, someone said, "Alyssa, you used to be such a kind person, and I just don't know what happened." And like leaving the church suddenly turned me into this like cretin of the devil. Today's video is brought to you by the American Humanist Association, and for over 80 years, the AHA has promoted a vision of ethical living and personal fulfillment without needing a belief in God. The AHA is one of the most important organizations that's pushing back against religious overreach, and they do this by lobbying lawmakers, asking them to uphold the separation of church and state, and by organizing activists. This gives secular people a united front in the fight against religion creeping into our laws and government. Of course, they also advance humanist education efforts, and they support secular social media channels like this one. The AHA has over 34,000 members, all working together to support equality for humanists, atheists, and free thinkers. If you've been a victim of religious overreach that violates the separation of church and state, the AHA is currently accepting submissions for legal assistance. Cases can be submitted to legal@americanhumanist.org for consideration. I've joined the AHA because the work that they're doing to advocate for the separation of church and state is so important to me. And if you want to consider becoming a member, you can go to humanist.org/Grenfell. While you're there, consider becoming a sustaining member and check out their merch store. They have mugs, hoodies, t-shirts, and you'll be the envy of all your godless friends. But yeah, I think it really ties in with, at the beginning of episode 1, you make this observation that Mormonism was made for Instagram, and
Yeah.
how it's this, basically ballerina farm. You go through some of the most famous influencers who promote a really happy-go-lucky vision of Mormonism, and how it's like perfect families and the bake sales and the soccer moms. And can you explain why you decided to start the series based off of that concept?
Well, I think that Mormonism's in the zeitgeist right now. And I think, honestly, you're a big part of that too. I mean, if Mormonism was built for Instagram, I think ex Mormonism was built for TikTok. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you for the work you're doing. But that aside, Mormonism is in the zeitgeist right now. And a big part of that, I think, is the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City and the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, this swig mom talk group, that has swept the world with their intimate look at their lives. And real Mormons don't really go on reality TV. And that was that frustrating part, is like, you're only seeing this one-dimensional version of a very complicated, very high demand religion. And I think that it's important to like enter at a place where everyone can understand, but then say, but we're going to go a little bit further and a little bit deeper than maybe Secret Lives of Mormon Wives would ever take you.
Yeah, I think it really reminds me of, speaking of TikTok, there's a viral channel right now where a woman calls into different churches and she plays the audio of a crying baby and asks if they will donate she asked for 1 can of formula for her baby who hasn't eaten since the day before. And so few churches are willing to provide any assistance to the mother. Can you guess what the Mormon Church responded with?
I mean, I'm dying to know.
Yeah, they definitely said no. They said, they were like, sorry, we can't help with that. And I think to me, this like idea of a cruel kindness is present in that response, where they're very willing to smile and give you a free Book of Mormon provided as a free gift. But when the rubber hits the road and you need help and you're down on your luck, or like really struggling with maybe your orientation, or maybe with abuse, and you ask for help, suddenly it's just crickets. There's total silence. And so I really liked that you started off by talking about this juxtaposition of the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, Ballerina Farm, the influencer, with the reality that so many of us lived with, which was a pretty cruel doctrine. In the show, you meet with a man named David Matheson, and he was very well known for a long time in the church with pioneering conversion therapy within the church. Can you tell us more about his story?
Yeah, I had never met him, but I had heard of conversion therapy. And when I was an active member of the church and Relief Society president, I had a friend whose husband was attending these journey into manhood camps. And like, I didn't even understand what I was like latently endorsing, because all I was worried about was, her marriage being kept together and her working through whatever her husband needed. And so to see it from that perspective, and then to then sit down, meet with him, learn about what was really happening, and just flip the lens on my entire perspective was, I mean, it was shocking. And I thought, when I heard about some of the practices that they did in these camps, they were re-traumatizing these men. They were not therapeutic things that would enable them to cure or pray away their gayness. They were ways for the church to like pay for men to like be told they were wrong. It was horrible to learn about. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but like there's this simultaneous like revulsion for what you've been a part of your whole life and looked the other way and endorsed with your time, your money, and your testimony, and then know what was really happening and to be so repulsed by it now.
Yeah, I feel like there was definitely an encouragement around being naive and just kind of turning a blind eye to how many people don't fit the perfect Mormon mold. Even if it's, gay people are a great example of this. They can't have temple marriage, they are expected to just live a life of celibacy. But even women who struggle with fertility are also not fitting the Mormon mold. Women who get divorced, kids who don't serve missions. There are so many different elements and moments where someone might fall or slip outside of what's expected of them and be met with this wall of judgment, and often just like finger pointing and people calling you a sinner, people calling you a degenerate or less than. I think when my sister left the church, that was a huge moment for me, seeing the total backlash against her and the hate she got when a day before she was one of the most beloved sisters in the congregation, and it was like overnight suddenly she was this heretic. And yeah, I think to go back to the church's stance on being gay, could you explain what the church's stance is and why the church doesn't even use the word gay?
Yeah, same-sex attraction is the terminology that it had always been used for when I was a member of the church, and it was an earthly affliction that would vanish in the twinkling of an eye when you pass through the veil and go to heaven, and then your gayness will disappear. You will marry a woman, multiple women, and create worlds without end. So there is no tolerance for gayness to be part of the human experience and have a full life of love and, family and wholeness. It was just a trial that you had to either fix, get over, or ignore.
I think not even allowing people to call themselves gay is another cruelty, because it's not even being gay, it's an affliction. It's same-sex attraction, like it's a disease. And as much as people are mocking Surviving Mormonism, there is literally an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to gay and queer suicides. Some of the people on the list are those who passed away because of their attempt. Some of the people on the list are people who just attempted, but it's a long list of people. And I think it begs the question, how many bad apples do we have to have before we realize that this is a systemic issue? This is part of the church doctrine that is pushing people toward this. They're literally writing it in their suicide notes, but instead there's this callousness with which people respond to people who are saying, I can barely survive this doctrine, or I didn't. I've seen a lot of people saying that the show would just be covering these bad egg, bad apple scenarios.
Hmm.
And these are just one-off stories. This is not the church. These people just had one bad experience and they blame it on a whole organization. And what would your response to that be?
I would say one bad apple, if the reason that there are checks and balances built into institutions all over the world is so that bad apples cannot perpetuate abuse and go unchecked. And a church that is so wealthy, so powerful, led by the hand of God, should have enough checks and balances that bad apples should not be able to persist and hide within the architecture of the church. I mean, if these are bad apples, do better. You know what I mean? You have the resources, you have the money, you have the knowledge. Don't build a system that allows predators to hide and children to be re-victimized. Because a hotline to a law firm does not protect children, it protects the men in charge.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get to the hotline in a bit because that is a crazy aspect of the way the church operates. And I think that when we talk about bad apples, they fall straight from the tree. I think
True.
that this bad apple narrative really allows people to have some cognitive dissonance around why these things are happening in their church. I used to be a teacher. I taught third grade, mostly in elementary. And every single year, I had to do fingerprinting, I had to do a background check. These are very baseline expectations of anyone that works with children, and the church simply chooses not to include this. It's also not very expensive. It's a low budget way to ensure that people who work with kids are not dangerous or have not had prior offenses, and the church chooses not to do this. So it's not bad apples. They're proactively choosing not to engage with systems that are pretty much the corporate standard for anyone who's trying to be safe.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, and I love that David Matheson was willing to come on the show. I'm sure he's had a lot of backlash with basically promoting conversion therapy for so many years and then saying, this isn't working for me. He's now with a partner. I think it's really great that he's willing to come on the record and say, I was wrong, and this is a bad practice. This is not therapeutic. What would you say is the most interesting thing you learned from him?
That he has more integrity and more courage than the church and the general authorities. They refuse to acknowledge or apologize for any of these things, and they're letting him take the fall, where he was part, once again, of them that sustained and promoted and encouraged him to create these conversion practices, to believe in what he was doing, and to feel endorsed not only by his church leaders, his bishop, and the participants, but by God himself. And so for David to have the courage to say, this was wrong and I regret doing it, is legions ahead of what the church still refuses to do. There's no church member on record acknowledging or apologizing for conversion therapy. And that alone should speak to, the integrity of David Matheson over the integrity of the leadership of the church.
Yeah, I remember when I was a BYU student, there was somebody at the corner of campus handing out these pamphlets, and I took one because I was a nice Mormon girl, and it was basically an expose on the electroshock therapy that BYU once did on gay people as part of trying to cure them. Another form of conversion therapy, this one where they would literally shock them. Around this time, there was also like the gay witch hunts, and there's such a lack of admission around the harm that this caused or an apology. I mean, the church leaders have literally gone on the record to say, we don't apologize. Don't expect us to apologize. Don't criticize the leaders, even if the criticism is true. And it just shows to me that, yeah, someone like David Matheson is willing to put his face back on camera to say, hey, this was harmful, versus the church, which has made no similar apology.
Exactly. I mean, it's crazy, they can't acknowledge or apologize. Like, apologizing is principle of repentance and of the gospel. I
Yeah,
just
and maybe the reason they're not willing to apologize is that it creates a paper trail of admission that they're not perfect, that they're infallible, and that they don't want, they want members to have this in their brain that apostates will always try to tear the church down, and anyone who's disgruntled simply had a bad experience, and this has nothing to do with the church. It's not the church, it's the people, and all of these things distance the leadership and the church from any criticism, like from this show, and allow them to get off basically scot-free, while the victims are there having expected some sort of help and instead
Yeah.
only received basically either judgment or they ignored the problem.
Or shunning. Yeah, and to think that these victims were paying their tithing, were going to church, were having family home evening, were doing their ministry while being abused, while struggling, like going to their bishop over going to the police. Like these were valiant brothers and sisters in the gospel that deserve to our respect and like protection.
Yeah. And that's what they expected to get. I mean, I think that's why someone like that woman calling for formula and getting the answer no really pulls the lid off of this whole thing, as it's not a charity, it's not Christ-like, it's a business. They're not really there to help. If members are paying 10% of their income and it's not going toward the mom asking for formula, what is it for at that point?
Yeah. What is it for? Yeah.
I think one thing that stood out to me during that portion was David basically said that his leaders suggested that he marry a woman and that she would turn him straight. And he basically fully marries a woman and doesn't even tell her he's gay till about a year into the relationship. This is not something he thought of. This is not something just the bishops told him. This is something I've heard from so many gay men who have talked about this, is that their bishops told them, just marry a woman, it'll resolve itself
Hmm.
eventually. And why do you as a former woman in the Mormon church, why do you think that women are basically thrown under the bus in these scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, basically, like find any woman, it doesn't matter who, and she's going to cure you of your gayness and make it right. You know what I mean? Her basic needs are ignored. And it just reminded me of kind of how I felt when I was married, that commitment was greater than desire. Commitment and covenants were more important than happiness. It was just all about the commitment to the principle rather than commitment to self. And I have heard this from so many gay men, that they were told that it would go away as soon as they started having, and David even said in the interview, normal sex. And my whole body just cringed, like, because you've heard that message over and over and over, like, this is normal, this is good, and this is not. And how damaging and horrible for that messaging to still be imprinted on us after all of these decades.
I think that the church's willingness to say basically that women and children are less important than men, and this is a recurring theme within your show, within Surviving Mormonism, as like children are basically on the altar of the spiritual journey of the man. Women are on the altar of the spiritual journey of the man. It really, those two parties are not nearly as important as supporting the priesthood holder, making sure he can still be showing up to church in a suit and tie every
Yeah.
Sunday. And the fact that this woman, whoever he's going to go find and marry, that her happiness and her even like sexual satisfaction is just sacrificed on this altar of like this man who needs to find a wife for salvation. It's just so unbelievably cruel to me.
It is. It's unbelievably cruel and unbelievably misogynistic, and it's embedded in the doctrine and in the culture.
Yeah. And I think one final thing before we get to episode 2 that I wanted to ask, and you and David both touched on it during your interview, is basically this idea of how glad you both are to finally be free of the church and to live your life, make your own decisions, not be guided by this doctrine or this perfect path that you're supposed to be on, but just be guided by whatever the heck it is you want to be doing. And I wanted to ask you about why it is and how this idea of like finally being free, how this feeds into your decision now to publicly come forward and talk about the church and criticize it.
Well, I mean, it's been a process for me, and it hasn't been easy because there's so much of me that just is resistant to critical statements. I just want to people please. I don't want to be the crazy heretic that I heard people I heard when people left the church, I know how we spoke of them. I was around the dinner tables. I know what's being said. And so I think that that was built in before I left. And now that that's out there, like the freedom is just everything good in my life happened after I left the church. I mean, with the exception of my beautiful, amazing children, but my life was like in black and white, and now it feels like it's in technicolor. I feel a little bit of survivor's guilt because for me, something bigger came along that enabled me to leave that community, that safety, that structure. I had my own job. I wasn't going to be affected professionally. I had my own money. I didn't have to like a man or a husband. And I had for the first time a community that would embrace me in the same manner that the Mormons had. And so I feel that now, and I want to like go back and like pay it forward and just create that same space for others, because for a lot of people, leaving doesn't result in all of their dreams coming true. Leaving results in a lot of pain, a lot of loneliness, a lot of broken dreams. And I feel like I have an obligation to them to somehow like shoulder the burden.
Yeah, I mean, truly, Heather Gay could be doing so many different things. You know, if it was just about, like, I've seen so many comments about this show, people being like, this is just a money grab. You're an entrepreneur, you have multiple businesses, you're a reality TV show star. I'm sure you could get a million partnerships. Like, there's so many ways you could just like make money that criticizing you in this way is so flimsy to me, but I think it just speaks to how people can't face the music, like face the fact that you're doing this because you feel very strongly, like what you're saying, that other people deserve to know what you knew that helped you decide to stay or leave. When I first did my Mormon Stories episode, someone that I'm close to came up to me and basically said, I'm so jealous that you left when you were 23, because I
Mhm.
left when I can't remember her exact age, but she was probably in her 40s or 50s. She was just like, you have so much more of your life than I got. So much of my life I gave to the church, and now I'm finally free and I get to live it, but so many years lost. And I think for me, turning around and sharing what I know with others, I've had so many people who are like, I chose not to serve a mission because of your content. Not because of the content, because of polygamy, the Book of Abraham, the church's investment scams, so many different things. But
Because of the truth that you are just sharing truth. You know, you're not sharing propaganda, you're not sharing a PR spin, you're just sharing truth, and like in such a powerful way. And I feel much like that woman that came up to you, like, I am jealous of you too, like, because with your strength and your clarity and your commitment, like, you can change the world. Like, I'm still coming out of it and I'm trying to like grind it out now because I only have a few good years left. But like, I feel like you're generational chains, and I didn't have women like you to look up to. I didn't have examples of women that could say, you're right. You're being gaslit. That's not true. That is made up. And the second I did, and it was, my best friend and business partner, it changed everything for me. And so having a voice like you to look to, it's imperative to set the example, to blaze the trail. My season one tagline was like, I'm blazing a new trail. And it was a little cheeky, but like it really rings true to me now. And I'm really, really grateful that I had this chance. And of course, I want to give back to the people that I gave the first 4 decades of my life to, and I want to let them know that I'm here for them and love them the same as I did when I was a member. I have that same love for humanity that I have, now that I'm not.
yeah, it makes me so sad when people criticize those who speak out against the church, because like when I talk about Joseph Smith's wives and try to share their stories and tell their names, those were Mormon women. I'm actually representing and supporting Mormon women by telling their stories, which the church has tried so hard to bury their names and their stories. And when you're talking to, whether it's David or Ben or Lizzie, like all of these people are part of the Mormon community. Even if they've left it, like ex-Mormon is still in the Mormon
Yeah.
umbrella. And
Brothers and sisters in the gospel, are we not all, you know?
yeah, so to criticize the church or even share stories of those who have been wronged by the church is to still elevate Mormon voices. It's just the voices that the general membership has either not heard because they've been silenced, or that they've been told those are the apostates, they're not worth
Mhm.
listening to.
Yeah.
Before we continue, just a quick reminder to like this video, subscribe to my channel. I've also dropped a link for Heather's book, Bad Mormon, below. It's an amazing book, so check it out. I'll also drop a link for Surviving Mormonism, so that if you want to watch the show, you can definitely check that out too. Drop a comment too if you've already seen the show and want to share your thoughts. And now we're going to talk about everything we saw in episode 2. In episode 2, we meet Ben, who is basically your friend's partner. And he shares that his abuse started when he was 4 years old, and it continued on till he was 9 years old. Can you explain a little bit more about your connection to him and what you learned from his story?
Yeah, Ben is my best friend Shane's husband, and they've been together for years. But when they first started dating, I knew that Ben had this story of abuse that at the hands of the church, and that he had really been victimized and spoken out about it. And when I first heard that, instead of like leaning in and wanting to know more, I just shut down, put my blinders on, and didn't want to believe it, didn't want to hear it, and didn't really want to be a part of that conversation. And so it really caused some distance in my relationship with Shane and Ben. And then when I wrote the book and I started doing this Surviving Mormonism, I thought it was just kept weighing on me that like I'm hearing stories from people all over the world, and the story of those closest to me, the most painful, the most hard to confront, like I'm still refusing to hear. And it just became very clear to me that if I was going to be, if I was going to be an advocate or an ally to a stranger on the internet, I needed to really start close to home with Ben and make penance for the way that I had sidelined his story and really refused to hear things that I was scared to hear.
Yeah, his story I think was so horrible on so many levels. And if anyone wants to see the whole thing, you should definitely check out the show. They really jump into it and explain everything that happened. But first is that I think how similar his story is to so many other survivors of child sex abuse in the church. I did another podcast called Architecture of Abuse where we talked about child sex abuse. I talked to a lawyer who's litigated thousands of different cases for these types of crimes against the Mormon church. And this same theme always comes up where the family, the very, very faithful, devout Mormon family, has this horrible situation. They find out about the abuse. Instead of calling the police, they call the bishop. The bishop basically just says, "Hey, brother so and so, please stop," or don't take the sacrament for a few weeks. And the man is like, "Sure, I'll do that." And then the abuse continues for years after that. In the case of your friend Ben, he said that he tried to report the abuse. They literally, his abuser was like, "Just have him call me. I'm sure we can clear it up." And they left
Yeah.
it at that.
I mean, what shocked me the most about that is the abuser said, "Oh, he just has me confused with someone else." Not, this could never have happened under my watch or in my, in my consciousness. Like, this just must have been some other guy, not me.
I mean, he was abusing him from age 4 to 9. So I don't think he was just like, "Oh, I
Confused.
mistook you for someone else." And this pattern of basically bishops not calling the police, trying to deal with it in house, it is truly a pattern. And I'm going to read you a headline that came out of Arizona in 2022. This is the headline: 7 years of sex abuse, how Mormon officials let it happen. There are truly so many examples of Mormon bishops turning a blind eye to this. And in every single case, the victim says they could have solved it and they didn't, so it continued for years. From your experience talking to survivors, why do you think the Mormon church operates like this?
I don't know why they operate like this, but I understand why it succeeds is because of the architecture and the systemic problem of men being in charge and protecting each other, and women and children being collateral damage on the altar of the man's progression to God. I believe that it's out of diligence, out of commitment to the organization, to the church, that we view this abuse as a sin and not as a crime. And if you need resolution from sin, you go to your bishop, you go to your church leader, you don't go to the police. And that is reinforced. And if all the church would have to do is say a directive, anytime a crime against a child is committed, call the authorities immediately, then refer to your scriptures for spiritual guidance. And if that were the law of the land, we would protect so many children. But that's not the church's directive. The church's directive is say nothing until you speak to our lawyers first.
That's a great segue into the hotline or helpline, which you all cover in the show. There's a clip you included of Dallin H. Oaks promoting the helpline, which I was like, I've never seen this clip before, which is crazy. But can you just explain how the helpline worked?
Number that only bishops have access to, and the directive is in the church handbook. When a crime or a situation outside of your purview occurs, immediately call this number and you will be guided through the appropriate process. And so, following directives, that number doesn't go to a mental health therapist. It doesn't go to a police officer. It doesn't even go to a therapist. I mean, it goes to a law firm that is trained in litigation and in protecting the church's interests. And more often than not, they look at the granular laws of the state they're in, and they decide whether or not the clergy is obligated to report a crime against a child. And if he is not, they tell him not to.
Yeah, and the bishop is just left floundering, like telling the guy, hey, I sure wish you would cut it out. And that's
Yeah.
the only defense for the child. I think that this is another example of something that's a response to this just a few bad apples claim, because this was truly the way the church operated. This was the system that bishops went through. They were told, if someone reports this, call the helpline. It goes to a lawyer, not to the police, and the lawyer will look into your state's laws to see if you have any accountability to report this to the authorities, or if you can just say, oh, because of clergy penitent privilege, you don't have to say anything, mum's the word.
And I will add, through talking to bishops, if it is the state law mandated that they have to report it, they send a representative down, they report it, but refuse to give a statement. And the directive is, do not give a statement. You get reprimanded if you give a statement. So yeah, the law requires us to do the bare minimum and then back away.
And I think what I wish members would hear out of this show, Surviving Mormonism, what I wish they would internalize is that if they had a gay son or a gay daughter or anyone that was LGBTQ, a friend, a child, this would be their experience. And if they had a child that was being sexually abused, the church would allow the abuse to continue. The church would not help. Similar to this formula situation, if you needed formula and you called for help, the church may just say no. The crazy part is, on that phone call, she didn't even say, like, I'm a member of your church, can I have formula? She didn't say, I'm not a member. She just said, can I have formula? And they said no. They didn't even ask, well, are you a member?
Yeah. Where's your nearest bishop storehouse? Who is your
Yeah.
Relief Society president?
And I think that I wish members would internalize that this is systemic, that this could be you. Have enough empathy to see what this organization is doing to those in your congregation. If either of us had a predator in our congregation growing up, the church would not have told us. They may have very well known there was a predator in the congregation, and the church would not disclose it to anyone in the congregation.
I have sat in on ward councils when I was Relief Society president and voiced concerns about a predator's wife being in a nursery calling, and how that has there's got to be a gatekeeper somewhere, and been told to shut up and be forgiving and that everything would be fine. Like, literally said, I don't think that's a concern. Recently, child predator in our ward, his wife is called to the nursery and he just roams the building.
I mean, yeah, even in Ben's story, the first time he shared that the abuse happened was that he was pulled out of church by this
Out of his
person.
Sunday school class.
Yeah,
Yep.
pulled out of Sunday school class, taken into a field, basically. And I think there's so much blind trust in the church that people don't realize that if there's a predator, that they may just be in the congregation next to them, and that the church isn't going to do anything to bar them from the building. They're not going to make it publicly known. They're just going to allow them to be, maybe even be in the Boy Scouts back when they had that, or be in the youth program. And I think one of the crazy things about Ben's story is that his abuser, Jess, the reason that he finally got a little bit of vindication is that a different person took his abuser to court.
Mm-hmm.
This is the article. I'll put it on the screen here. And this woman named Ginger Utley, she basically came forward with the same claim. To read from the Tribune coverage, it says, before his sentencing in 1994, leaders in his Mormon church wrote letters to the judge asking for no jail time. He was a good man, they wrote, who had changed and was no longer a danger to anyone. Jail time would cause irreparable damage. And so here, once again, we see multiple people are saying this specific person is a predator. And whether it's Ben's leadership or Ginger's leadership, multiple people are coming together to rally around this predator to ensure that he does not face consequences.
Can you imagine if Mormons rallied around Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein? You know what I mean? Like that's the same level of depravity, and they are writing letters of support because he's a good guy from the ward.
Yeah, and they're just like, oh, like this girl probably was wearing a tank top. So she's the temptress. Or this young man, this boy, his name is Ben, he's gay. So we can't really
He
trust
wants to
anything he has
blame
to
it on
say.
something. Yeah, we can't trust. He's yeah, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. If you don't fit the mold, we can't trust anything you're saying anyway. So your voice is immediately, your experience is immediately silenced.
Yeah. And I thought it was so interesting that in the show, after Ginger takes Jess to court, he is finally excommunicated after all of these years. But he is, even so, people might not know, even if you're excommunicated, you're still permitted to attend the congregation. So as of 2023, he's still going to church after having multiple people come up against him and say he abused me. He's still, as of 2023, attending church. And I'm curious just what your visceral reaction was to hearing that news.
Hide your wife, hide your kids. Like, this is not okay. If you give your time, money, and love and dedication to this institution, you should also demand that they protect your children and protect other people's children, and stop saying, not in my backyard, because literally this man lives in my backyard.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's why critics of the church are so important. Because of a critic of the church, they no longer require children to be alone in one-on-one meetings with bishops. Now, a parent can request to join. It's still not mandatory for a parent to be there, but I don't know if members always recognize that these outside forces, or these members, saying, I'm going to raise my head above the line and criticize the church, do actually enact real good and change policies that have a real impact on the membership. Why do you think the church has worked so hard to demonize critics?
For that reason alone, right there, like, if we can discredit them and invalidate them, then we can progress on unfettered. Why was I, as an adult woman, afraid of Jean Delin? I was walking into the abyss, when I went on Mormon Stories. Why was I afraid that my life would implode, that my customers would go away, my kids would, get pregnant and end up on drugs? Why did I think all of these Mormon catastrophes would happen? Because I spoke to an apostate.
Yeah.
And that I was a grown ass woman, and I had to swallow that fear. And that is just mind control, indoctrination, and I don't know what to call it. You're better at articulating it. What is it?
No, yeah, I think it's definitely indoctrination, and I think it's so many over the years, just hearing outsiders demonized so often. I remember on my mission, we were going through the ward list to see who was less active to go knock on their door. And I remember next to one of the names was written ex-Mormon RM, return missionary. And me and my companion, we literally decided not to go there because we were like, if a return missionary leaves the church, we don't even like see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Like, we don't even want to know what virus impacted this person so that they're no longer attending. So we truly chose not to go to the house of the return missionary because we were so afraid of the apostates. And I'm glad you brought up John Dehlin. I mean, John was excommunicated from the church. So was Nemo. So was Janice Allred. So many other people I could list here. They excommunicate the public critics of the church so much more quickly than they excommunicate the literal child abusers. And it doesn't make any sense.
Makes zero sense. They excommunicate a critic before they'll excommunicate a predator.
And that really, I think, shows where the true priorities lie. And I
Yeah.
know that you said you're not fully in contact even, I think, I don't know if it was in the book or where I read it, but that you're not in contact with a lot of your family.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, I'm guessing that's a result of your church membership, or can you speak to how your speaking out against the church might have impacted that relationship?
I mean, I think that immediately impacted the relationship. I think I could have left the church and been still of the fold if I wasn't publicly. I think writing the book and then going, I think it's a combination of leaving the church, living outside of the standards of the church publicly, and also just, I think my family's deeply ashamed of me. And I remember when we talked on the first AMA I did on ex-Mormon Reddit, and I remember feeling like the pain you were feeling from just like that loss of familial love. And I felt like I was just maybe a little bit further along in the process, but like now I even feel even further. Now I feel like it's my choice. Like, I don't really want to be confronted with people who reject me and want to challenge me and want to discredit the way that I have like pulled myself out of something that was really hard and created an entirely new life for myself. Like, I like and am proud of who I am, and I don't really want to be around people that have an agenda, and so it's by choice now. If they were to reach out, which they have not, I think I would say, I'm going to protect my peace and I'm going to honor yours.
Yeah, I think I remember and I'll put it across the screen when I said hi when you were doing one of your AMAs on Reddit. But yeah, it is so challenging to know what everyone said, like you said, being around the dinner tables, like hearing what everyone said about other people who left. And then when you leave, you know that those same things are being said about you. The people who I knew who would talk about John Dehlin, they literally said he was possessed by a devil, and that was why he was drawing so many hearts away from the church. And so I can only just, extrapolate that onto myself and know that for me and for you, it's very much one thing to leave the church, but the only way to even get a little bit of respect when you leave the church is to be totally silent about it.
Mhm.
That's the only way to leave with, I think, any level of, I wouldn't say love, but just like okay, well, you left, but as long as you're quiet, we'll still respect you.
I mean, I would say it's the only way to leave with any level of dignity.
Yes, dignity is a great word for it. And sometimes I've heard people even say that, like, oh, well, they left, but they never talk about it. They're not one of those crazy
Yeah.
ex-Mormons that makes it their whole personality. And I think to leave and then to be loud about it, that's when it goes from like, oh, let's try to love and accept those who've left, to being like, no, we're definitely still shunning those people.
Yeah. We're shunned. And I welcome it. Shun me. I think Johnny Cash said this, I'm going to misquote him, but sometimes it's good to be hated by the right people.
Yeah, there's a quote from a show that says, your boos mean nothing to me because I've seen what makes you cheer. And
Ooh.
I try to remember that, if this is what you believe about gay people, if this is an organization you can stand by, even after seeing all of these many, many things that they've concealed or done wrong, I just don't know if I need your respect at this point, honestly.
That's a great, great point.
So I thought we'd jump next into episode 3. This is where we
Okay.
meet Jenny and Lizzie, who, once again, just another crazy and horrible story of suffering from abuse and neglect. I would love it if you could dive into their stories.
Yeah, Lizzie and Jenny are two remarkable sisters who were just shuffled into this architecture of abuse. And despite reporting and being caught in the act of severe sexual abuse, church leaders repeatedly sent them home with their abuser, said it was an issue of sin and redemption and not a crime. And as a result, they continued to be abused for 13 more years. And Lizzie was just so remarkable because she was able to confront her abuser, who was her father, and actually record his confession. And I think it's some of the most chilling insight into a predator's mindset and how this little girl didn't stand a chance. And especially after she told not only her bishop and his counselors and the stake presidency, but an entire disciplinary council of what we would esteem to be good, righteous Mormon men, and to have them in turn still send her home with her abuser. And her story, I think, is just compelling because it shows how her dedication to the church became her detriment, and her identity as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints kept her dad safe for decades.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that after the initial report, the abuse went on for, like you said, 13 more years. And at another portion, they say that the mom reported that she told at least 18 different men about the abuse, and not a single one of those men called the police. And the idea that you could know that that was happening to a child and go home and sleep at night, I, as someone who was a teacher, as someone who is a mother, as someone who is a human being, I cannot comprehend that. I truly cannot understand someone that would hear what was happening to those children and that would just cross your fingers, hope it ends, and go home and go to sleep. I just,
It's unbelievable, and there's no way that you could say that that's a bad apple situation. That's a bushel and a barrel across state lines, across wards, across, area authorities. And it's just something that could have been stopped and wasn't. And we should know that. If you are committing your time to a church and your energy, you should know the shadow side of it too.
yeah, I mean, I often feel like when I served a mission, I know you served a mission too, like, I feel like I was peddling something I didn't even understand. Because you go when you're so young and you've just been raised from the womb to be a devout Mormon and discouraged from ever reading anti Mormon literature, which is often just like history. You truly don't understand. I'd have people say stuff to me on my mission, and I'd be like, that isn't true. And then I'd ask my mission leader, or I'd ask another person, or I'd ask a member, and they'd be like, oh, yeah, that is true. And I'd just be like, how could I be a member for this many years and attend for hours every week and not know the most basic things about my religion?
And especially after leaving, you start to learn. And like, I remember too, being on a mission, just being so committed and so, I'm just going to say it, so deeply brainwashed that I remember writing a letter home, and I saw on the wall, they had written like on the side of a church building or something, or it wasn't a actual church, but the building we met at, like, go home, you brainwashed Mormons, you're a cult. And I wrote home to my parents, like, my heart breaks for these sad, poor people. I look back now and I read that letter and I think, babe, you didn't stand a chance. You didn't know how to say no to this. You didn't have the opportunity to.
Yeah, and I think that's why so much of my criticism goes toward the church and not the members, because when the bishop is calling the hotline, it's not because the bishop is thinking to himself, let me not report this to the police. He's been so trained throughout his entire life to follow what the church says that calling the police doesn't even enter his mind. He just calls the hotline because that's what he's been told to do. And that's really what indoctrination does to all of us, is that it takes our gut instincts and overrides it with this religious indoctrination that tells us common sense, don't follow my common sense, do what the church
Yeah.
says every single time. And that's why in all of these news stories we see the bishop do the same thing. It's not because it's the most logical thing to do, it's because it's literally what they've been trained to do.
Yeah. They don't give them training in anything other than name, rank, serial number, call the hotline. If you don't know what to do, call the hotline. But they know what to do, and the right thing to do is to call the police. But if they do that, they will be, in violation of their commitment and covenant to God. And that's messed up.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me about Lizzie's story is once again, we see not just the children on the sacrificial altar, but the mother as well, because
Yeah.
in this case, when the mother first, the mother is the one that sees the abuse. She's the one that takes it to the bishop. And the bishop tells her basically, hey, if you slept more with your husband, he wouldn't be doing this. And it's your responsibility to curb his appetites, and so go home and you can take care of it with that advice. And so once again, we see the woman. You also mentioned a story where the woman was basically sleeping in front of her child's door to prevent the abuse.
And who told her that that was more important, to keep her family together and support her husband in not sinning, rather than sending him to prison and rescuing this family, you know?
Yeah, this idea that the eternal family is the most important thing on the planet, and that even if there's abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, even if there's infidelity, literally no matter what happens, that the answer should always be counsel the family to stay together, is one of the most heinous parts of the church, because they are enabling abusers to continue to abuse for years with this one single advice that the family should stay together at all costs.
At all costs. Yep.
I think another interesting part of Lizzie's story was that even after the father was excommunicated, kind of like in Ben's story with his abuser Jess, after Lizzie's father was excommunicated and they changed congregations, they still went to church and pretended to be the perfect Mormon family. And he even pretended to wear garments in order to keep up this facade. And I think it plays back into the earliest episode, which is about how the church is all about appearances and not about being truly actually good. And I think I just wanted to have you expound on that point of why the church fixates so much more heavily on perfection, perfection you can see, rather than simply just being good.
Yeah, like I focused always on being a good Mormon, not a good person. And when those rules, are in direct conflict, it's like we always choose Mormon over person, And I remember in church the creepy guys that had Jolly Ranchers in their pockets, I mean, I don't mean to be glib about it. Like, I remember my mom defending me against a guy one time. He said, "You have beautiful daughters." And she said, "Stay away from my daughters." And I thought, what a rude, outspoken woman. Like as a teenager, I thought that. And you know what? I'm so proud of my mom for like having enough, chutzpah to say that to him. And I feel like maybe that protected me more. But I grew up in a ward where children were abused, and they were my friends and my neighbors. And I think that they do walk amongst us because that the system protects them. And then the spirit of inclusivity, we don't know why that guy's not sitting in the chapel or not taking the sacrament, but he's, in a full suit and he's getting pats on the back and he's doing all the things, like he's masquerading as a member. And the ward's probably doing that in a spirit of inclusivity, shepherd him back into the fold. We don't need predators in the fold. We've got plenty of members. We can ship them off to an island and we can protect the women and children, even though they don't hold the priesthood and aren't head of the household. It's just crazy to me. But I know that the system's built to do that. And I know that women don't have the choice to say otherwise.
It is so crazy to me the lengths that, just in reading these stories and hearing these stories, and I've heard this as a criticism. Yes, of course, every community has predators. Yes, of course, every community deals with these issues, but not every community has the organization over them hiding the abuse. That's no longer just like, oh, well, this happens everywhere. Now you've instituted a very specific set of measures that ensure that we see children who are going to continue to get abused and have no help and nothing happen. And that's why we get articles that all have, it's like Groundhog Day, seeing these articles, such and such abuse continued for X number of years. It's
Mhm.
just like this hamster wheel of like, I'm hearing these people tell these gut-wrenching stories, but even if some of the details are different, there's always this same element of, I told the bishop and he didn't do anything. And
Yeah.
it just,
Well, he did what the church told him to do, and the church didn't do.
yeah, the church told him, slap on the wrist.
Yeah, slap on the wrist. I think shows like this hopefully will expand the audience and get enough people invested in just saying, hey, listen, just make change. Takes what you said, like raising your head above the line and saying, I can't be a part of this. If this is what you believe and you perpetuate, you're not going to get my tithing money anymore,
Yeah.
or my time, or my loyalty. I wish my friends would say that. I wish my smart, believing Mormon friends would say, I'm not going to do this for you if that's how you treat people I love.
One aspect of this that is so sad is that it usually takes someone very close to you to enact that change. Like I've also heard a lot of stories of people who choose to leave after their child comes out to them. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, now it's not working for me, now I can leave. But I wish that the empathy for what that means could extend past your own children, past your loved ones, and into, if this happened to that family over there, it could happen to my family because it's the same church. I think the church
Yep.
has engineered so carefully this lack of belief in victims, even mocking victims, as we discussed at the top of the video, saying that apostates just had a bad experience. Like there's so many levels at which the church can defame any critic, that I would say that criticism isn't working, but half of millennials sounds like are leaving the church. So I do think it is,
You're making
it is making a difference.
to mock it and think you're morally superior and funny and you're actually just mocking victims of abuse. Even if you think you're doing it in the name of your faith and defending your church, you're a pretty shitty person.
Yeah, I mean, and I was heartened because in almost every mocking post, one of the most liked comments was, I'm a member and this is wrong. And that shows me that there's hope and that a lot of people in the church do still have a conscience. They still can see this and say, hey, if someone had a bad experience at the hands of the church, that's actually not something we should mock. I do feel like there's always this like glimmer of hope in these types of posts where someone is like, I don't think that this is very Christ-like. And hopefully for those people, they're like, oh, like, this is also this is teaching me a little bit about the culture I'm choosing to participate in.
Yeah. These are my people, these are my people, and this is what they funny and cool.
Yeah. I think to close, at the end of episode 3, there's a scene where you wrestle with the word cult. And I wanted to just ask if and explain why you included that scene and why it is that you're hesitant to fully use that word.
Ugh. Well, I'm hesitant to use the word because I'm still kind of learning all about it. And because for so long of my life, I vehemently was offended and denied that I would have any part of it. I mean, I saw it spray painted on a building and I wept for these people deceived by Satan. The message, I've been called it my whole life and I've never believed it. So to now have to swallow that and look at my life with perspective and a new lens, it's painful. And it's painful because I don't want to invalidate my history. I don't want to erase my family. I don't want to erase my childhood. I'm proud of who I've become. And I think in no small part, a lot of who I've become is because of the way I was raised and grew up. And so that puts me in this, cognitive of, are cults bad? Because, you know, yes, but was my life bad? No. And so I want to be really honest about it and just say there's a reason we should be so scared to say it. And maybe because it's hitting so close to home.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot about my experiences in the temple with secrecy and with garments and with the temple robes and even just backlash around even talking about them. And I think you talking in the show about cult tactics, like people slamming you so hard for even showing what you were married in. I mean, I was married in the temple clothes. And even as an ex-member, like I still get so much backlash for just simply showing what I was married in. When
Yeah.
when I took pictures for the Wall Street Journal article, I was showing her this photographer, and she was like, "Wait, you were married in this?" And I'm like, "Yes." And I
And no one told you. No one told you would be married in that,
yeah, just,
right?
I think I found out just when I went through the temple. I think I started to intuit it. I don't know if I even remember having a specific conversation that was like, the endowment robes are also what you get married in.
I learned it on my wedding day. I walked in, they said, "We're gonna," and I said, "Oh, wait, wait, wait. We're putting the apron over and the robe. Why am I in it? Why did I buy a dress?"
My wedding dress is my reception dress. And the fact that my husband's mom couldn't watch him get married, my grandma drove for hours and hours to not watch me get married. Like, I don't know how anyone could look at all of these things and not at least maybe empathetically understand why we feel like cult sounds like at least mildly accurate word to describe what was happening.
I mean, I watch your TikToks and it like gives me strength to be like, it's a cult. I know. I know what I feel. There's no way what we do in the temple isn't a cult. I mean, there's no technical way it isn't.
I mean, they used to have to swear to off themselves if they ever told what happened in the temple. I don't
Like,
like,
that's what my parents did. They did the signs. My sister did. Like, I barely am of the generation that didn't. We're barely in it. And like the fact that we'll be burned at the stake for saying that, like, have you seen what we wear in the temple? Have you seen things we say and do? Like, it's weird to me that you won't allow us to call.
yeah, even just the garments that I have. Like, not only did I hate the endowment experience and felt like it was so bizarre and not spiritually uplifting in any way, and then I have to carry that with me in this very uncomfortable, saggy underwear that has literally symbols over my nipples. It, like,
And that have no divination at all, that are pure Masonic symbols,
yes.
and like nipples and my belly button, and I'm wearing bike shorts under my skinny jeans, like, and thinking that God values me more than my neighbor because of it.
I also, like you said, I feel like I have a very complicated relationship with that word, probably primarily because I think when you use it, it makes people's brains turn off. But
Yeah.
also, I have one of my videos titled "The Day I Realized I Was in a Cult," and that is truly just me being honest with my personal experience about my temple endowment. I've even heard members joke like, "Now you see why we're a cult, ha ha ha!" Like, because everybody knows how strange and bizarre it is. We didn't even talk about like why, like how the high demands of missions. We didn't talk about, so there's so many other elements.
That's why we need more seasons, and we need more seasons of this show. We need more stories shared. This we've barely scratched on, you know, 3 episodes, and we know that there are thousands, and I mean, I am really encouraged by the people that shared, and I hope that the response that we've been getting will continue and people will tune in and watch and be fascinated and empathetic, and supportive.
Yeah. And so I did have a question. Is there going to be a season 2, or is it kind of based off of the initial reception?
It's based off the initial reception and the viewership. I'm very hopeful. I'm very proud of the work we did, and I know that we have hours of footage and stories to tell, and I hope that people want to hear them. Doing Surviving Mormon has been such an amazing experience, and we want to say thanks to Alyssa. She was a contributor and is in the credits, and we couldn't have done it without her. So huge shout out to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really cool to be able to. I know I initially put the call for stories out on my channel. I also got to talk to the showrunner and producer about the show and basically compare notes about some of these stories and what's happening in the church. So thank you all for involving me in the production of the show. We will conclude on that note then to ask everyone to go ahead and go over to Bravo, go to Peacock, go to the link I put below. That'll be a great place for you to watch the show. It's 3 amazing episodes. It's hard to watch, but it's so many important stories and so many important elements of what's going on behind the perfect facade of the Mormon Church. Definitely go check it out. And thank you again to Heather for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.